Okay. So we'll cover law of demand tomorrow along with law of supply, but let me just quickly complete the topic of demand for the time being. So you understood a lot of things about demand. That demand is only that part of the desire which is effectively converted, and we call it effective desire. An effective desire is one that is backed by willingness and purchasing power or ability, as we call it, right? This is what we said. The second important thing today we'll understand about demand, and demand because it is a factor, it is an important factor that we will take in economics. And from next class onwards we'll have terms like demand, price, and various other output, cost, various variables. So demand is a factor, and that also depends on a lot of other factors. And so in economics we will use a term called function. This is a very interesting term. Students of stats would have studied this once. So what is a function? A function is basically a set of variables or a set of factors that affect or determine a particular variable, right? So if I say for example, confidence is a function of knowledge. Confidence is a function of knowledge. What does it mean? That knowledge is one factor, along with it could be other factors that determines or influences your level of confidence. That has a bearing on the level of confidence. Similarly, when I use the word demand function, I am talking about the set of all those factors that might have a bearing or influence on demand, or factors that determine the demand of a commodity. So today we'll understand demand function, and in future whenever we do functions, it could be production function, it could be cost function, it could be supply function. These are all set of factors which will affect production, cost or supply. यहाँ तक clear है सबको? So demand function को आज पढ़ लेते हैं. Demand function is nothing but, it is a set of all those factors that determine or influence demand of a commodity, and this can be expressed in terms of equation also. And that's where we show that demand for X is a function of factors like price of the commodity X, price of other goods Y, it could be income of the consumers, it could be size of the population, it could be the taste and preferences of the people, it could be n number of factors, it could be climatic conditions and nature of the commodity and stuff, and so on and so forth. It could even be government policies and so on. So all those factors that will determine or influence demand for a commodity will be termed as factors affecting demand. So demand function is nothing but the factors, the set of factors affecting demand, right? The set of factors affecting demand will be termed as demand function. And so today we'll just quickly try to understand some of these factors and what sort of influence they have on the demand. And then tomorrow we'll cover up the most important factor, that is the price, in detail, and understand that relationship under the law of demand. So now there are so many factors that affect demand for a commodity, and first factor that we can study is the price of a commodity, Px. So where P of X represents price of a commodity, price of the commodity itself, we have to understand what is the nature of relationship. So normally price affects demand. There are different types of products, but initially we'll only take, for convenient handling, the term normal goods. Normal goods you may treat as products which are neither purely necessities that you can't live without them, even if the price rises you have to buy them. No, they are not necessities. nor are they luxuries that you would buy them to show your position in the society, and the costlier the better. No, they're normal goods. Normal means if they get costlier, you buy them less. If they get cheaper, you buy them more. And you can alter your rate of consumption, and these are products which face law of diminishing marginal utility. That means the more you consume, the utility falls. And all those. So I'll talk about in detail about what normal goods are. The books generally don't talk about here, but as of now we'll take this. So these are the normal goods. And normal goods, if you talk about normal goods, we find that the demand and price have an inverse relationship. That means with every increase in the price, there is a fall in the demand, and vice versa. If the price falls, the demand rises. So they are inversely proportional, right? This is what the first relationship between price and demand is. Vis-a-vis, if I talk about the second factor, which is called the income of the consumers, right? We may find that for normal goods, when the income of the consumers rises or falls, we see a direct relationship between the income and demand. So if the income of the consumers go up, the demand of the commodity would also go up. If the income goes down, the demand also goes down, because you can buy less units of that commodity. Similarly, there's a factor called price of other goods, and we represent that as y, because we were showing demand for x, so we can call it p of y, where y could be anything. It can be a substitute or it can be a complementary product. Now these are two different things. We are not here considering independent products jinka koi relation hi nahi hai x se. We are not talking about them, but we are talking about what if x and y were substitutes. So I agree that substitution may not always be the same, like tea and coffee, for example, you might have studied as a common answer. Now, to many of you, tea and coffee can be perfect substitutes. To few of you, they may not be perfect substitutes. You might have a preference of one over other, but they can still be substitutable. And for many of you, they may not be substitutable because you do not like one of these. So this is just a moment, sir. Oh, sorry. Honey, go ahead, go ahead. Yeah. So, the concept of substitute might vary from person to person. As I said, it's very subjective, but as of now, let's assume that tea and coffee were substitute goods. So what will happen if we were taking the demand for coffee, right? And we assume that coffee is not superior, or tea is not inferior. We assume that they are substitutes. What will happen if the price of tea rises? Obviously, going by the law of demand, the demand, or the relation between price and demand, the demand for tea will fall. Yes or no? If the rise in price of tea happens, the demand for tea will fall. But when the demand for tea will fall, many people would like to go for a substitute product because its price is stable. We are not assuming that coffee is costlier, or we are not assuming that it's a superior product. So what may happen, that the demand for coffee might rise. So what you see is the price of the other commodity and the demand for the different commodity are moving in the same direction when they are substitutes. This is also studied as cross elasticity. So demand for x will be directly proportional to price of y in case they are substitutes. That means with the rise in price of a substitute, the demand for the opposite product will rise, and with the fall in price of a substitute good, the demand for the other product will fall. While if they were complementary goods, you would find that there is an inverse relationship between them. They are complements. Now what are complements? Again, we are taking basic economics. Then I'll talk from a very business perspective that what happens when you take these traditional examples. It doesn't really work like that. But अभी हम मान लेते हैं, for example, that the products are complementary, they go along. I say car and tires. You got to buy tires, you got to buy cars. You buy them bundled, but then I'm assuming the market demand for cars and tires, right? So what happens is, if the price for cars goes up, and for some reason it results in fall in the demand for cars. If it results in fall in demand of cars, you would also see a decline in the demand for tires. That means they are moving in opposite direction. Similarly, if there was a fall in price of cars leading to a rise in demand for cars, you would also find a rise in the demand for tires. That means again there's an inverse relationship between price and the demand for the other complementary product, and that's what we see as an inverse relation. So in case you are unable to remember this relationship, whether they are positively related or negatively means inverse, opposite directions, then you can just run a small calculation in your mind that if car price goes up, the demand goes down, then the tire demand also goes down. So with a rise in price of cars, there's a fall in demand for cars, and so the complementary goods, the price of X and demand for Y move in opposite directions. So these were three variables that we talked about. So can you quickly answer what is the nature of impact of price of X on the demand of a commodity? Whether it is direct, we can call it direct, or we can call it positive. So is it positive or inverse, yani negative? What is the impact of price on demand for normal goods? Positive or negative? Come again?
Negative.
Negative. That means
Negative.
with the rise in price of X, the demand for X will fall, right? Now we talk about income. What is the nature of association? Positive or negative?
Positive.
Very good. Now we talk about price
Positive.
of Y. Price of Y, if it is a substitute and a complement, what will happen in case of substitute? Is it positive or negative?
Positive for substitute.
Very good. So positive, what? The price of Y and the demand for X will have a positive relationship. They'll move in the same direction. Positive means one falls, the other falls, one rises, the other rises. While in case of complements, it would be inverse. That means if price for Y increases, so obviously thereby reducing the demand for Y, and this would lead to a rise in the fall in the demand of X as well, which is inverse relationship. Good. And then similarly there could be other factors. If the government policies are favorable, there we cannot directly determine whether it will be positive or negative. It will depend on the nature of government policies. Population. Now one assumption is if the absolute population increases, then there may be a positive impact on the demand. Not necessarily that it may happen for every product, but population itself, forget about the demography, कितने लोग उस product को खरीदने वाले हैं, उस segment में है क्या है, but the population, if it is high, it is assumed that segment will also be high, or the target market will also be increased. So that is also probably the reason why a lot of companies focused on India, and companies like luxury car companies, or for that matter the bike companies, the luxury bike companies targeted India, in spite of knowing that India is a developing country and a low income country, low per capita income, and a poor country by GDP per capita. But they came down to India. Why? Because they believe that the size of population is big enough that even if a small percentage of population buys the product, this small percentage is going to be substantially bigger than other countries which are relatively smaller in size. So this is what brings them to India. They realize that a population of 1.3 billion would have enough high income consumers who would be able to afford your product. So that's what makes India a big center of attraction for a lot of companies to come down, and force companies like Toyotas and big giants to come up with small cars in India as well. So that's how the market dynamics works, and the population can have an impact. And similarly, climatic conditions and various other factors. Technology is also a very interesting factor. Technology, it has been seen, the moment the new technology comes up, it increases the demand for newer products and technology products, while it reduces the demand for obsolete goods. So technology is also a factor that affects. So this was what we try to understand in terms of demand. Now, because I'll be covering law of demand and in the subsequent class, and law of demand would not be nothing but in this function, besides price of X, price of Y, income, and so on, we would only understand the relation between demand and price in greater detail in law of demand. So that we'll do in the next class. But today, because we have done law of demand, the demand function, let's quickly also do the supply function, because that's a part of microeconomics which you can understand very quickly. They are similar. So when we say supply function, we are again talking about a set of all those factors that determine the set of factors that determine supply of a commodity, right? And so what could be these be shown as? So I'll try to show it in form of an equation, that the supply of x, or the quantity supplied of x, is a function of, now the first factor remains common, p of x. So price is one common factor that not only impacts the demand, but it also impacts the supply of products and services. And normally, what do you think will be an impact of price on the supply? Will it be positive or negative? Let's try to understand. Take a guess.
Positive, sir.
Good. You believe that it is going to be positive. So why is that going to be positive? Any guesses?
Sir, as the
I lost your voice.
price of the commodity increase, the firm will try to sell more of its product, and as the price of the commodity falls, the
Why?
firm will try to
That's
sell
correct.
lesser
But
of it.
why would it do so?
The
Why?
firm will not want to. The firm don't want to sell at lower price.
Why? That's what I'm asking. Why? याद है आप में से किसी ने कहा था कि अगर हम प्राइस घटा दें तो डिमांड बढ़ जाएगी। तो एक तरफ हम पढ़ रहे थे कि प्राइस घटाने से डिमांड बढ़ेगी, और डिमांड बढ़ेगी तभी तो हम सेल्स बढ़ाएंगे। लेकिन अभी हम कह रहे हैं कि प्राइस घटाने के बाद सप्लाई ज़्यादा करने की इच्छा फर्म की नहीं होती। यही तो मैंने आपसे कहा था, यही तो रिस्क है कि अगर प्राइस घट जाएगा तो डिस्करेजिंग होगा, आपका प्रॉफिट मार्जिन स्क्वीज़ हो जाएगा, और जब प्रॉफिट मार्जिन स्क्वीज़ होगा तो आप उतनी मेहनत करके उतनी यूनिट्स या थोड़ी ज़्यादा यूनिट्स नहीं बेचना पाएंगे। यू विल रादर बी हैप्पी व्हेन द मार्जिन इंक्रीजेस, दैट मीन्स प्राइस गोज अप, कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रोडक्शन के मुकाबले आपका प्राइस ऊपर गया, आपका मार्जिन बढ़ रहा है, तब आप ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा बेचना चाहोगे। यही रीज़न है कि कैलामिटीज़ के टाइम पे या किसी रीज़न से जब मार्केट में सप्लाई अफेक्टेड है, रेट्स हाई हैं, लोग ज़्यादा प्राइस पे बेचना चाहते हैं, और उस समय लोग अपने स्टॉक्स को क्लियर करते हैं। जबकि जब प्राइस बहुत लो होता है लोग होर्डिंग कर देते हैं, दे वेट फॉर अ टाइम कि जब प्राइस बढ़ेगा तब बेचेंगे, अभी से ज़्यादा बेच के फ़ायदा नहीं है। सो लॉट ऑफ पीपल डू दैट. So the reason for this is that you're right that they have a positive relationship. With the rise in price, the firms try to sell more and increase their supplies. But the reason for this is, number one, because most firms will have a profit motive. So those firms which have a profit motive, they would see a greater opportunity in form of high margins. अब मार्जिन बढ़ गया ना प्राइस बढ़ने से, तो प्रॉफिट मार्जिन बढ़ रहा है, कम बेच के भी ज़्यादा कमा पा रहे हो, तो ज़्यादा बेच के तो और ज़्यादा कमाओगे। तो जितनी ज़्यादा यूनिट्स बेचोगे उतना ज़्यादा मार्जिन के हिसाब से प्रॉफिट बढ़ेगा। सो इन ऑर्डर टू मैक्सिमाइज देयर प्रॉफिट्स, द फर्म्स लाइक टू सेल एट अ हायर मार्जिन, एंड दैट्स व्हाई दिस हैपेंस। एंड इन केस ऑफ फॉलिंग प्राइसेस, the profit margin reduces. This is what is assumed, and that's why the firms find it less interesting to sell more units. They try to wait for a time and sell when the prices will again go up. एंड उसका रीज़न है कि उनकी इन्वेस्टमेंट जो है, अगर प्राइस घटेगा तो ज़्यादा इन्वेस्टमेंट करने के बाद वो उतना प्रॉफिट कमा पाएंगे, कम दाम पर बेच रहे हैं, ज़्यादा क्वांटिटी बेचनी है। जबकि अगर प्राइसेस हाई हैं तो दे विल बी एबल टू गेट मोर रिटर्न्स ऑन देयर इन्वेस्टमेंट, एंड दैट्स द रीज़न व्हाई दे ट्राई टू सेल एट अ हायर प्राइस। सो नॉर्मली देखा गया है कि प्राइस बढ़ने पर हर सेलर सेल्स बढ़ाता है, और एक रीज़न इसका और भी है कि जब प्राइस बढ़ता है या सेलर सेल बढ़ाता है तो मार्केट में ऑटोमेटिकली ओवरऑल सप्लाई बढ़ जाती है। देन अनदर फैक्टर दैट वी हैड स्टडीड वाज प्राइस ऑफ वाई। अदर प्रोडक्ट्स प्राइस कैन ऑल्सो अफेक्ट द सप्लाई, बट इस केस में जब हम बात करते हैं तो हम ये कहते हैं कि भाई अगर राइवल गुड या कॉम्पिटिटर प्रोडक्ट का प्राइस बढ़ जाता है, मतलब कॉम्पिटिटर प्रोडक्ट अगर प्राइस को बढ़ा देता है, so that also can make this product relatively costlier or cheaper to the other product. But at the same time, other firms might also like to increase their sales because they believe that now their product is relatively cheaper and people would prefer it more. But इसको हम ज़्यादातर यहाँ पे पी ऑफ वाई को बहुत डिटेल में इसलिए नहीं पढ़ते, बिकॉज कहीं ना कहीं इसका इम्पैक्ट कहीं ना कहीं वाया डिमांड आता है, बट स्टिल यू कैन स्टडी दिस। इनकम इज नॉट जनरली कंसिडर्ड हियर। वाई? बिकॉज अगर हम देखें ध्यान से तो ये एक बड़ा ही कॉमन सा आंसर है कि डिमांड और सप्लाई के फैक्टर्स इनडायरेक्टली एक दूसरे से जुड़े होते हैं। फॉर एग्जांपल, आई गिव यू एन एग्जांपल, कि अगर लोगों की इनकम बढ़ जाए तो हमें पता है उनकी डिमांड बढ़ेगी, और जब डिमांड बढ़ेगी तो सप्लाई की ज़रूरत पड़ेगी। बट इस केस में इनकम इज़ नॉट डायरेक्टली अफेक्टिंग द सप्लाई, It is indirect based on demand. So such factors we don't include here, especially in law of demand and supply. We only include those factors which have a direct impact. जैसे टेक्नोलॉजी दोनों को अफेक्ट करती है डायरेक्टली, डिमांड सप्लाई। अगर नया टेक्नोलॉजी प्रोडक्ट है तो लोग उसको खरीदना चाहेंगे, दैट्स व्हाट द ऑब्सेशन ऑफ टेक्नोलॉजी इज। और टेक्नोलॉजी हमारी प्रोडक्शन टेक्निक को भी तेज कर सकती है, जिससे हमारा सप्लाई बहुत तेज बढ़ जाता है। सो दैट्स वेयर इट कैन अफेक्ट। Government policies is a common factor that can affect demand and supply directly in their own ways. But some factors we do not include, which we believe have an indirect bearing, like income. Like for example, now if I talk about population would also not directly affect the supply. It will indirectly affect the supply, because greater the population, greater the demand, greater the supply. But yes, this is not rocket science. If you believe greater population means more number of producers, possibly, so the supply will automatically increase, and then you can justify presence in the law of and the supply function. So function can have a number of factors. It depends ki as a mature student of economics and aware student and a capable student of management, how well can you figure out the factors, anticipate them, and see their impact on the overall demand. The only challenge is कि पढ़ने के लिहाज से इनको इंडिविजुअली पढ़ना आसान है, but in reality all these factors collectively, they are collectively affecting demand and supply, and when they are collectively working together, it becomes a very dynamic and complex scenario where your rationality, your judgment will vary from one person to another. Some companies anticipate that better and take successful decisions, formulate fantastic strategies. Some who are unable to anticipate their overall impact in the right manner, they turn out to make wrong strategies or they fail. So that is based on judgment that cannot be taught. We can do that partially using cases, discussions, examples, but then ultimately how you perform will depend on the level of understanding, the level of analysis and logical reasoning and analytical ability you develop, the awareness that you have about factors, and what level of maturity and learning have you developed to take better decisions and anticipate the changes in the environment, and how do they effectively affect the demand and supply. But we'll do the most fundamental parts together, based on which you can do these analysis and anticipate based on your level of awareness and rationality. So the reality for this reason can be different from or more complex than what you are studying in the books. But we do not say that what book says and reality are different. No, what happens in reality is manifested in the books, and what has been written in the books is a manifestation of reality, and that's what you see, and that's why books are written, and people practice those in reality. So demand certainly gets affected by these factors. These factors can have a different bearing on the demand and supply. Their collective impact is difficult to measure, but if you use the right judgment, have the right wisdom, you can manage to do it. And that's where business intelligence, data analytics, along with logical reasoning and experiences of management and the human capital, they collectively work at making decisions more close to being accurate than earlier, when the decisions were based on intuition, judgment, and experience. Today the decisions are also supported with data and analysis. So that's where we are trying to combine technology with management and make managerial expertise or managerial abilities more effective in taking decisions. That's where analytics and business analytics and intelligence works for managers. But you still require managerial capabilities or that intellect to be able to understand that data, figure out what's there, and some judgment has to be beyond the data or what the data shows, based on your anticipation, your judgment, and your knowledge. So that's all for today. I think we've also done the supply function, factors affecting supply. Tomorrow we'll start with law of demand, and that's we'll extend that to law of supply, and finally move on to elasticity, because that's where we are trying to understand the relationship between price, demand, and supply, and the magnitude in which the price, demand, and supply affect one another. This is very important unit of analysis, and this goes into the demand analysis and deciding what to produce and how much based on a tentative price. So the demand analysis will include this, and we'll study this in the next class tomorrow. So we'll try to complete that unit tomorrow and then move on to subsequent topics of one, indifference curve analysis, which is based on the ordinal utility approach, and then we'll move on to production and cost, right? So that's all for today. If you have any queries, please feel free to ask. Any queries? Is that all? Are you clear with whatever has been discussed today?
Yes, sir.
Please go through the SLM.
Yes, sir.
I'll try to give you these videos as well, and go through the SLM and the assignment. I'm sure most of the things you'll be able to do well if you have attended the classes seriously, right? All the best. Have a nice day.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Take care.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.